Thank you.
I think just to echo what Ken has been saying, we've heard a lot about police accountability and possible plans for implementing that feature in our government. I guess a couple of the questions that keep getting raised is, what is working in other cities or what isn't working? And as far as Chicago, I know there were two big plans that were going before the council, and then I sort of heard nothing at all for a while. So I'm just wondering what's happening with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe what I would love to answer those questions. I think as I go along my presentation, some of those questions are gonna be answered, and so I'll keep those in mind, and I'll answer your questions as I go along my presentation. And then if there are more questions about that, Richard, then you can just expand at the end. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So here's what I'll do. I'm gonna share now my screen. Oh wait, I need to be made a host again. Sorry, I guess when I drop.
Okay.
One second. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll start sort of at the beginning of where the police accountability team at One Northside started and where our roots kind of take place. The police accountability team started about 4 years ago, maybe a little bit over that. But it really started sort of in the wake of all the big, really tremendous pressure that the city was under after the case of the cover-up of Laquan McDonald. So we know that that was a really tragic moment in the city as far as the police and the mayor being involved in this massive scandal that made a lot of people question about, what is the role the police play in our communities? How are they protecting us? And what transparency do we have? So we know, for example, that one of the things that happened is that Immanuel created the Police Accountability Task Force, which was set to sort of examine what were the issues in the police department. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot was part of that task force and was the chair of that group. They issued a bunch of recommendations as to what could happen and what were some of the things that needed to be done. So around the same time that this was happening in 2016, One Northside was forming its police accountability team and essentially bringing together community members, just like everyone here, to create change in the communities. And One Northside focuses on our North Lakeshore communities, but we do a little bit more work on the North Side in general. So as we were coming along and we were forming our team, we were like, well, there's this, big call for police accountability around the city. What's going to be the way that we get involved? What's going to be the way in which we help make sure that our communities are being kept safe? And so we joined in coalition this new call for reforming the way police is held accountable, and we helped form the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. Now, that alliance, or GAPA as it's often called, was basically a coalition of now 6 organizations. There have been different organizations that have been in and out, but at the moment it's 6 of us that, like One Northside, have impact in their communities all throughout Chicago, in the West Side and the South Side. And our goal is to create a more transparent, more effective way of holding the police accountable for the different things that they do that they should be held accountable for. And so in the beginning, what we did is we had a lot of conversations with a lot of different community groups, with a lot of different community members, like the ones you see here. And we asked them, what do you think is needed? What do you think is important? And one of the things that we did too is that we called on experts and we asked them, how does your city do it? What has been working in your city to make police more accountable? And this is a question that was asked from the top, like, what is working in other cities that Chicago doesn't have yet? And one of the answers that we got is that Chicago actually needs some kind of civilian involvement in the way that police decisions are made. So this is one of those 76 recommendations that the Police Accountability Task Force made. But the recommendation basically said civilians, community members, need to have a say in police decisions. And I'm not talking about, small level decisions like the color of the uniform, or, do you have to wear a hat when there's, a promotion happening or anything like that. But I'm talking about big policy level decisions that happen that affect the community. The recommendations from the task force and from experts coming from Los Angeles, Seattle, many different cities said the city needs and deserves a commission or a oversight body that is looking at the way police are held accountable and that is helping to make decisions about actual policing. And that's been the rallying call for GAPA, that we want community members to be having a say in all the different decisions that are being made by the police, and to be informed about what actually happens at those really powerful tables where police make decisions. And so if you think about accountability, there's the system that we have now, and then there's the system that we need to implement. The system that we have now basically really depends on 2 or 3 really important players. One of the big players is the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. COPA is basically the investigators of any police misconduct that happens. So if I have been abused by police or mistreated, I can file a COPA report, and that COPA report triggers an investigation about that police officer's misconduct in the specific case. The COPA is a fairly new thing to Chicago, but it's something that other places have had in their cities for a long time. But it's supposed to be independent of the police and investigates parts of police misconduct. Now, if there is a decision that, or rather a recommendation that COPA makes about the way that this police officer should be handled, oftentimes these recommendations about the way the police should be held accountable end up at the police board. And the police board is a group of people appointed by the mayor that makes decisions on police misconduct cases. So it's almost like a review board of what should happen to a police officer if there's some recommendation that comes out of COPA. Internally, the police department also investigates their own officers if they have specific kind of misconduct cases. For example, if they are in violation of like uniform or minor offenses, or if they do something when they're off duty, they also have an internal review board. That's not listed here, but if you look at that back end accountability column, those two, the police board and COPA, are the big the big accountability apparatuses that we have for individuals. Now, the Inspector General and the Deputy of Public Safety also plays a role in looking at accountability and investigating specific cases, and in filing reports about how the police in general should be behaving or how they're not behaving properly. So oftentimes you'll hear Inspector General releases a report on the police department. That's one of the main functions of the Inspector General, to be analyzing what the police has done so far. Now, if you notice, all of this sort of focuses on what we call back-end accountability. So what happens when an individual officer or an individual section of the police does something that they're not supposed to? So sort of accountability post-fact. What we really are interested in thinking about is the front-end accountability, which means how do we make sure that we change the way the system is functioning so that these things don't have to happen in the first place. Now, one of the things that we currently have that Chicago has been dealing with for the past several years, since the Laquan McDonald case, has been a federal consent decree. And basically that's just a lawsuit that the city was involved in, where they agreed to reform certain parts of their police policy. And in the meantime, the city has to sort of adhere to those binding agreements that they made. That's, however, temporary, and it only focuses on certain issues of the police policies. It's not all-encompassing of everything the police does. It has very specific targets in their policy that they need to reform. And so there's this big missing piece, right? That commission, that community-led group of people that looks at the policies overall and that tries to make recommendations about how those policies should happen. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, but just think about it that way, right? Like, in looking at the way the policy is created, there's currently not a lot of involvement. So what are we doing about it? Well, GAPA basically calls for a system where inside of each police district, and there are 22 of them, all over the city, we could elect people that are able to look at accountability in their district. So if I, for example, live in the 11th district, I can talk about, in my district, there's these things that are happening. How are we going to address them? And if I had somebody that was in charge of looking at that accountability, I could go to them and say, hey, I noticed this issue in policing. Can you talk with other people in other districts to see if this is something that is, bigger than just an individual case and might be a policy shift that we need to have throughout the entire department. The idea that GAPA is proposing is that we would have 3 members of the community that are elected to these positions for a total of 66 elected representatives called district councils or councilors that would be looking at accountability in each of the districts. Essentially, the change that we're creating is that we would have a meeting space where the priorities of the community are put together, where we can organize and we can amplify those concerns that each individual community has so that they can be uplifted to the city as a whole, and so that we can identify within our community as well what we need to do about these issues with policing and accountability. Now, that's the district level change that we want to make by creating district councils. At the city level, as experts recommended and as the Police Accountability Task Force recommended, we want to create a citywide community commission. So this is a body of 7 people that are selected by those district councilors that look at accountability throughout all of the police districts and say, okay, what we notice is that in the 11th district and in the 5th district, there's this policy about the way police respond to First Amendment protest, right? Protest about anything, right? It could be about Black Lives Matter. And we noticed that the way that they were responding to it is actually really harming the community. Can we look at that policy and can we suggest changes so that they can respond better and so that the police doesn't have to be engaging in activities or behavior that's harming the community? Those are the kind of things that this community commission could do. And they could do it year round. They don't have to respond to things when bad things happen. They can just look at the policy and say, hey, we think this policy could potentially be harmful. CPD, can you help us create better policy? Or we think this part of your manual on use of force needs to be updated because the language here is ineffective or is probably yielding more aggressive response than it needs to. Those kinds of things that the community wants to have involvement in. So that's what a community commission would do. And as I said, one of the other things that would be created would be a system where the commission could draft, revise, and even approve policies that the CPD and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability put forward. It could also have some authority or some input as to who the superintendent is, who the chief of COPA is, and who the members of the police board are. So it's a way of having community input in all those different accountability apparatuses, more so than what we have today. So it would be a really transformational thing. And one thing that I'll say about this commission, this is something that other places already have. Los Angeles has had a version of a community commission for over 100 years. So when we say we're behind, we mean like we're really, really behind some of our comparable cities. In the time that the LA Oversight Commission has been in place, it's functioned mostly the way it's supposed to. And obviously, policing is bigger than one commission doing all the work. But it's been showing that when the commission and the public are involved in policing matters, there's a better relationship that's formed. And more importantly, there's a really strong accountability on the police for them to improve proactively as opposed to just wait until things get bad. So this is one of the big things that we were working on at One Northside, promoting GAPA and promoting this change of legislation through an ordinance that would bring about this change. And it would create the commission and the district councils. In February, we were set to have this be voted on out of the Public Safety Committee and eventually voted on by the whole city council. We thought we had enough votes to pass the ordinance. We thought we were ready to do everything. But unfortunately, the mayor called on her ally, the chair of the Public Safety Committee, Alderman Taliaferro, and asked him to delay the vote. So to the question of what happened to this proposal that we were, all really hearing about and that we thought was catching steam, well, the mayor, again, who ran in police reform, who was part of the Police Accountability Task Force, who said would support GAPA, has essentially been blocking it now. And February was the most recent time when the second most recent time when that happened. What GAPA did in response to this is that we allied with the other proposal that has been put in place, the CPAC proposal. And CPAC is the name of the ordinance that they want to create, but it was being proposed by the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, or CARPR. The two coalitions got together and said, you know what, CARPR, you have a proposal that is a little bit more direct, that tries to have elections that are more direct, that makes the powers of the commission a little bit more encompassing. GAPA has a proposal that's really strong and involving the community, that creates a lot of elections in each district, that creates a lot of accountability, and that a lot of people like. Together, we can probably create something that's a shared agreement, and we can put it out there so that there won't be any division between community groups, and both community, or really all community organizations, can get behind. And we actually accomplished this after a month of being in negotiations and talking. What we're proposing now is a shared agreement between CPAC and GAPA called Empowering Communities for Public Safety, or ECPS. This joint ordinance keeps a lot of the same things that GAPA has, including that final say to make policy decisions for the department and for COPA. It'll also chooses now who the COPA chief investigator will be. So the person in charge of COPA will be something that a commission selects. We added geographic components to it so that members of the West Side and the South Side who are in the commission can have sort of a really better represented section, and it keeps those district councils that we wanted. It also creates a path towards more accountability if the city of Chicago decides that that's what it needs. It calls for a referendum that, if voted on, would essentially implement more of the powers that CPAC proposed, but need a referendum to pass. So this is one of the big proposals that we've been working on, and that answers the question of, well, what happened to these proposals that we were hearing about? What happened? Why are they not being voted on? They were supposed to. We introduced this already, and we were hoping that it would have a hearing in March. Once again, in March, the mayor postponed the public safety hearing. The reason why is because she wants to submit her own proposal. So as of now, there's one single community-supported proposal out there for police accountability. The whole of the GAPA and CPAC communities support it, but the mayor keeps stalling the vote. Now, One Northside has been really focusing on this and has been putting a lot of effort into our campaign to pass this. So that's one of the most important campaigns that we've been working on. There are more campaigns that I'm going to talk about, but I know that there's a question. Pastor Monty, do you want to ask your question before I continue?
Sure, thanks, Oswaldo. I was just wondering if you might elaborate on Alderman Osterman's role in this process with both GAPA and the current agreement between CPAC and GAPA.
Yeah, so Alderman Osterman was a chief sponsor of GAPA. He was one of the co-sponsors that helped us draft and start the GAPA ordinance. Since we decided as a coalition that we want to work with CARPR, Alderman Osterman actually played a very integral role at being at that table where we were meeting with CPAC and their alders and saying, hey, where's the middle ground? Where can we reach consensus? And he was really supportive and sort of having those negotiations, those discussions, and little by little pushing us to reach an agreement. And for you all to get a sense of what that agreement looked like in the end, CARPR and CPAC, we'll call them CPAC so it's less confusing. CPAC agreed that they want to keep the GAPA model. Everyone agrees that the GAPA model makes sense. district councils and a citywide commission makes sense, but they want to have a shot at having more powers. And in order to do that, they package all those extra powers into a referendum. So if our ECPS ordinance were to pass, we would have the GAPA model in place, and then we would have a referendum in like 2022 or 23 that would ask the city of Chicago, hey, aside of what you have now with the GAPA model, would you like to have directly elected commissioners? Would you like to have that commission have the power to fire the superintendent, to fire the police board? Would you like to have that commission have the power to make budget decisions? So even more transformative, more encompassing powers that the GAPA proposal has. If the referendum fails, those powers don't, come to be. And if it passes, those powers would then be vested onto the commission. But that was the agreement that CPAC and GAPA made, that we're okay with having that be a question for the city of Chicago to answer, as long as the GAPA model, comes to be as soon as possible, as long as we can pass something that puts that accountability that is very needed in place right now. Does that make sense? And Osterman was integral in making sure that that agreement was put together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions about ECPS, about GAPA, or sort of what it means to have a commission, a community commission on police oversight?
One other question I have, maybe somebody else has one, but just how are these district councils and the citywide commission supported? Is there a budget? Do these people get paid?
So yes, there's a stipend, a yearly stipend. So a district councilor serves 4 years, and they get a stipend yearly. I don't remember how much it was, but it's not a lot. And the district councils are something that you do with 2 other people, right? And you share that role with 2 other community members. And it's supposed to be about your police district and accountability there. Those are elected positions, so they have to be part of like a board of elections process to get elected and whatever. And the budget that we have does support the work that they would do to like have the meetings, have whatever resources that they need and so on. The commission does get a stipend as well. It's about $12,000 a year, and it's technically a part-time position. One of the things that we really wanted was people that are going to be doing this really sort of high-level work, but that have a life outside of it, right? That are in the community every day doing work otherwise, right? We don't want to like drain them out of their community just to be in this commission. We want them to continue doing their organizing, their advocacy, while doing this on the side and being compensated part-time. That the budget in total is about 0.3% of the total CPD budget. So it's a really small fraction, but it would support any kind of legal counsel that they need. So having any like lawyers, aside from the lawyers that would be in the commission, there's a requirement to have lawyers in the commission so that they can have legal understanding of the issues. It would support like staffing, it would support databases and whatever technology they need. And recently, one of the ECPS agreements that we also put forward is that part of the budget is also going to be allocated to researching, identifying, and testing alternatives to police. So diversion programs, whether mental health response programs, community-led diversion programs, but programs that don't rely on the police for public safety. So those are some of the big components of the budget. But yes, both commissioners and district councilors would be paid. Any other questions on this before I move on to talk about the other part of the work that we've been doing?
I don't want to hold you up too much. There's a Chicago Sun-Times editorial from the editorial board today, basically saying that the best way to have the police be held accountable is hold them, let the mayor be the one that's accountable, and not kind of semi anonymous elected boards. So anyway, that might be something to address at some point. Um, that opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's something that we've been hearing a lot about. Like, well, in your proposal, you're using a lot of things to get power away from the mayor. Aren't you weakening the mayor's accountability perspectives? I think one way that we can think about is one way to hold the individual political actor accountable is by getting them out of office, right? And that's what happened with Rahm Emanuel. He did a really bad job with the Laquan McDonald scandal. It potentially hurt him, and he decided not to run for office. Great. Then came Lori Lightfoot, that championed to be a reformer of, police reform, and she was going to come and change the system completely. She was the person that wrote those 76 recommendations. Well, what we know is that now that she's in office, she's unable to be held accountable because she can't even give us the things that she promised. So it's a little naive to assume that through elections, we can really hold these systems accountable, because the police are more than just the mayor, it's the police, and regardless of who's in office, there'll always be the need to have accountability, because the police and the work that they do require that accountability. Yes, Ken and Donna.
So I just wanted to add that I think that's a really bad idea, because mayors are elected on a whole bunch of different issues, not just police accountability.
Mm.
And so you're not going to have the influence in this as much as you would like, I think, if we were to go that way. So I don't really see that one working at all.
Yeah.
I agree with Ken on that. Here's a question, Oswaldo, you may not want to answer, but what is the mayor's problem? Does she see this as a threat to her power? And is that why she's stonewalling the whole thing?
The short answer is yes. That is part of her problem. That if in the current, ECPS proposal, a lot of the power for her to be the sole decision maker, she still has a lot of, she still is the person that chooses the superintendent in the end. She's still the person that chooses the police board. It just gives the commission a recommendation that she then chooses from, right? So it cuts her power a little bit, but she's still the main person doing all these things. And she's not okay with that. The criticism that we've heard directly from her is that community members don't have the expertise to be doing this kind of work, or to be making these kind of important, life-changing decisions over the police. Now, I'm going to talk about this in this next section, but if you do the work that I do, and you all do on the daily, you realize that community members are all experts, because there are so many people throughout the city that know this and are able to jump into the really high level discussions, really, because they have a passion for this and they want to get involved in this work. So our response to the mayor is, you might not think that the community has experts, but we know as experts that we can create policy, that we can understand policy, that we can really dive into these issues. And we have a pathway for involving people here. Why would you not support it? I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, any other questions on that? Great. All right, so I don't know how much time I have left, but I do have more things that I could talk to you all. I don't know if there's, if I'm over my time limit, Pastor Monty or Ken.
Well, Ken, you're
Muted still. You're fine. We've got, you got another 20, 25 minutes at least.
Great, perfect. Did you have another question?
No, actually, I was just hitting too many things on Zoom.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, so one of the things that we also do at One Northside is we do a lot of work with the Communities United Coalition of the Consent Decree. So going back to 2015, we're going to reflect back on this moment, right? When the city of Chicago was actually sued in federal court by the state's attorney over the way that police interacted with community members. What happened was that in that lawsuit, the police agreed to something called a consent decree. And a consent decree is basically a contract by the city of Chicago and the police with a bunch of community organizations and advocate groups like the ACLU and Equip for Equality to change the way they do policing. So that's what the consent decree is. Now there are, on one side is the police department and the city, and on the other side, there are the plaintiff groups that make up the consent decree coalition. Half of those plaintiffs are the Communities United Coalition. So those 4 community organizations, One Northside, Communities United, Community Renewal Society, and Next Steps. We make up that consent decree Communities United group. And then there's another group called the Campbell Plaintiffs. And they have groups like Black Lives Matter, Network 49, Women's All, Point Bulletin, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, and other community orgs that got together to sue the city. So basically 2 lawsuits got packaged together, and now it's us versus the city and the police department trying to address this contract on how to reform the police department. There are very specific things that are in that consent decree. For example, things like interactions with youth, right? The way the police interacts with youth is something that is in the consent decree. Use of force and the policy of use of force. The school resource officers program is something else. So all those policies and programs are things that are within the umbrella of the consent decree. And so One Northside is constantly, having to look at the proposals that the city and the police put together, and we say, hey, this is actually not improving. This is not the way that, the consent decree is supposed to be. And we are constantly in a back and forward with the city to sort of continue the progress and continue on the promise that the consent decree would bring change to the department. Now, you might have heard some of these battles happening this past year. One of the city's programs to change the use of force policy was that they would create a sort of working group of community members and experts so that they can look at the use of force policy. After that working group concluded, the working group issued, I think it was 160 recommendations or 120 recommendations on how to change the use of force policies. The city accepted about 10 of them. So in the end, we saw that the department and the city were not interested in listening to quote unquote experts. And so that sort of connects the way the consent decree and the community commission battle are connected. Because even when you put it, community experts, right? Professors, lawyers, community organizers, heads of community organizations in a room, and you ask them to look at a policy, they come up with really good recommendations, but the city still has the power to make decisions on it. So they can just decide that they don't want to make any changes. And that's under the consent decree, right? So this is just temporary. One day the consent decree is going to go away. So this framework that we have might not exist. But anyway, a lot of what we do in the consent decree is sort of look at those policies, digest them, work with our community members to have them understand, and figure out where we can continue to pressure the city to make those changes. Now, one of the things that has sort of really come up recently, and especially since December, was this case of this woman, Ms. Anjanette Young, who is a social worker who lives in my neighborhood, actually, the near West Side. And she was basically assaulted when the police came into her house as she was changing, raided the house, and it turns out it was, a wrong raid. It was not the right residence, not the right person at all. And the whole time that the police was there, they had a terrible response when she insisted that, it was the wrong house. So after this was uncovered, and after it came out that, maybe the mayor did have some knowledge of this, what has happened since is that some of these groups that are part of the consent decree, and some of our lawyers and some of our community groups, as well as other key political players, are actually working on an ordinance now called the Anjane Young Ordinance that would essentially limit the way that the police can execute search warrants. It would create some key limitations. For example, no more no-knock raids. So one of the things about this raid is that the police came in, they didn't alert the person inside that they were coming in. They just kind of kicked in the door and then started the search, right? The Anjane Young Ordinance would change that, and it would say, no, the police needs to notify the person, ring the bell, knock on the door and say, this is the police department, we're issuing a search warrant. You have 30 seconds before we enter the building. And then the person can, figure out what they're gonna do, and then the police comes in. It would also limit the times when the search warrant can be executed. So right now, the police can knock on your door in the middle of the night and just do it. The Anjane Young Ordinance would end that, and it would limit it from, I think it was 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's the times when the police can issue a warrant. So it would avoid sort of some of the things that happen in cases like the Breonna Taylor, the Breonna case in Kentucky, where they came in the middle of the night and they just entered and really startled the couple that was sleeping. The thing that it would also change is that it would protect young people. So if there are children in the residence, it would create a sort of policy so that the police can't, point guns at them. If there are kids, it would have, people that can come in and, help isolate the kids from the situation so that they're not put in danger, either of the police or the people inside of the home. So these are all changes that the Anjane Young Ordinance would create, and it's something that some of our allies at the Consent Decree Coalition are pushing for. The proposal is currently in the Public Safety Committee, so the same as our ECPS proposal. And we have seen that the mayor is also not in favor of it because she wants to keep power in her hands, and she wants to make changes the way that she wants to see them. But those are some of the two big campaigns that we're currently working at One Northside. You can learn more about the GAPA campaign, about the ECPS campaign on our social media. You can learn about it on the GAPA website. But one of the things that I will say is that we all play a role in this, and whether you want to get involved with ECPS or with the Anjane Young Ordinance, you can do so simply by joining our team and helping spread the word about it. There's a lot of work that community members like you all do already, but when we do this work in coalition, when we have our organizations work together, we do a better job and we act more effectively in sort of pushing forward for real change. Any questions? Yes, Pastor Monte.
Supposedly the mayor has her own proposal. She wants to put her own proposal forward. Is there any evidence that she's actually working on one, or that there are people that are involved in that conversation? And if so, I mean, does she have a timeline for when she's going to reveal it?
You mean for police oversight? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so she's supposed to come with a counter offer to the, GAPA CPAC proposal.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we first heard about the postponing of the meeting in February, what we originally heard was that the mayor was going to take 1 month to put forward her proposal. So that's why GAPA and CPAC got together and acted really quickly. It's been a month, and the mayor postponed the hearing again, the meeting again. So we really don't have any idea as to how long she's going to take. We guess that that's part of her political calculation and her political game, to sort of, delay the meeting until she is able to put something out there. And in the meantime, GAPA and CPAC have this proposal that we have, to sort of put out there and be vulnerable for people to critique and things. And we know that hers is going to be a lot less transformational. So I think she wants to come in as like, oh, you already know what you don't like about the ECPS proposal. Here's something that you could probably digest really easily. So we're unsure, and we think she's doing that, to sort of
Well,
play
so
into.
you don't know if she's got particular experts or people that she's talking to other than people like at this Chicago Sun-Times editorial board to try to just submarine the whole thing?
I mean, we don't know. The thing is, as far as like the experts, right? Like the people that know about police accountability, most experts will tell you that what we are proposing makes a lot of sense, right? And that you have cities like LA, you have cities like Seattle, parts, of the New York have similar commission, and they would tell you this is something that the city needs, right? And so, as far as experts, I think she's pushing her message on the media, but the real experts will tell you this is something important. The experts inside of Chicago, the political experts, for example, Alderman Matt Martin, who's an expert in police accountability, has done a lot of work on this before becoming an alderman and has done a lot of work since. He's also a supporter of this, right? A lot of people that want police reform will tell you this is a good step forward. Even she agrees with it because she recommended that when she was part of the Police Accountability Task Force. So in talking to experts, I don't think she has that many to talk to, but in talking to media to sort of spread her message about, the community is not ready, taking away political power, all of that, I think she's slowly doing that on her own as, she's working on drafting something. We really thought that the mayor already had something together. I mean, she has all the, policy, like, and legal teams necessary to put something together quickly. It's not like her process is a lot more quick than ours. For us to put something together, we talk to community, we talk to lawyers. She already has all the lawyers that she needs, so we're not really sure why she's stalling on it.
Thank you.
Can I ask, Lori Lightfoot was the head of the Police Accountability Task Force that had 76 recommendations. To what extent has that been implemented? Any of it?
It's a good question. I think some of the recommendations have probably been implemented. I think one of the things, if I'm remembering this correctly, was, for example, things like better training facilities, better, like more open headquarters, things like that, more access to like records, things like that are like recommendations that have already been sort of in the making. But I think of the like real substantial recommendations, there are, very few that have actually been implemented, like, the one calling for the commission. But I don't know, I'll have to check in to see how many of the 76 have been implemented. I would say very few.
Very few. That's all. So I don't know what other things you mentioned contacting aldermen. Most of us are in Harry's district or ward, so he's sort of already in the game. I don't know what other things, specific sorts of things would you might suggest?
I think the other big thing that we are pushing for right now is for community members to contact Alderman Taliaferro himself, and I can drop that information on the chat, or I can email it over to you guys.
That'd be great if you could email that to me. I can spread it out.
Got it. Yeah, I'll email it to you then, Ken. It's something really important that we want the vote, right? We want the chance to have this in front of the council, whether it's something that passes or fails. We just need that because we can't keep getting delayed just because we're waiting on the mayor. At this point, GAPA has been fighting for 4 years. CPAC has been fighting for 7. When you have more than 11 combined years of the fight, you just want to make sure that it's out there and that the council has a chance to vote on it. So I'll share some of those action steps with you all of course, if any of you have any interest in sort of being in these conversations through One Northside, we're always looking for people to join the team and be part of these conversations with us for the long term. We have a lot of great leaders that do a lot of work.
There are other questions? Check the chat. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really wanna-
Thank you.
It was a wonderful presentation. I guess I should, for the rest of the group, announce that next month, Libby Trost is going to be talking to us about where Jesus walked. So it'll be sort of a travel log through the Palestine and et cetera. The month after that, I will be giving a presentation on a couple of the Roman emperors who had the most effect on Christianity, good and bad, Diocletian and Constantine. And then the month after that, we will have a sort of a summary program of where do we stand with COVID, the giant issue that affects everything else these days. So that's what's coming up. Thank you all for attending. And Oswaldo, again, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
You all have a great day.
Have a great
You
day.
too.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.